Hello and welcome to this session for self-guided learners called Dancing by Myself. I'm really excited to be joined by Wilson Thomas and Lamia Sheikh. Hello, Lamia. Hello, Wilson.
Hi.
Hi there.
So this session's all about self-motivated language learners. You know that so many folks get to learn a language through school, but something that really inspires me about both of you is that you've pursued language learning through informal processes and are, for lack of a better word, teaching yourself. And so maybe you could just start out by just telling us your name and your first language and any language or languages that you've learned in addition to that or are currently learning in addition to that. Wilson, why don't you go first?
Okay, hi there. I'm Wilson Thomas, and my first language is English, and I'm currently teaching myself how to speak Spanish. And
That's perfect. And Wilson, just a quick context, how long ago did you start teaching yourself Spanish?
well, for this round, I'm about 20 months in. I did take. I'm basically maybe at a high school second year level when I took it back up. So I didn't start, from scratch. I had a little bit of prior knowledge coming into this.
There you go. And even though he looks like he's 22, folks, he is not. So there's definitely a gap there between his high school Spanish class and when he started teaching himself. Lamia, what about you? What is your first language, other languages you've learned, and the language you're now teaching yourself?
Hi, my name is Lamia. My first language is English, and I also know Urdu, which is pretty similar to Hindi. And currently, I'm learning Korean on my own.
And Lamia is being a little bit modest with she's dabbled in some other languages as well at much higher than a high school level, I'm guessing. And how long have you been studying Korean, Lamia?
I think it's been like 4 years, roughly.
So as a teenager, Korean was probably not offered at your high school.
Yeah.
And so what led you to say, you know what, I want to learn Korean?
So for me, I got into K-pop and I didn't have the intent of learning Korean, but I realized how similar some of the languages that I already knew were to Korean. So I knew that learning Korean would be faster for me and simpler.
And so did it kind of start like you kind of were already halfway singing along to songs? You just didn't know what you were saying and you needed to know
Yeah.
what you were saying?
Yep, that's exactly how it was.
And was there a specific band or bands that really prompted you to want to go down that route?
Yeah, so I got into BTS, but then gradually I got into other groups. And so I was like, I listened to so much K-pop, I might as well learn the language.
I love that. And what did it start with? And when you dove in, what were your early techniques of learning?
So initially I started by looking at some of the lyrics that were in the song and then looking at words that I wasn't familiar with. And gradually I started getting familiar with those words. And then I started taking notes on the words I'm not familiar with and learning vocabulary through that. The sentence structure for Korean is really similar to my native language, which is Urdu. So it was much easier to put together the vocabulary.
And so when you started off with the word level that you were talking about, was that just Google Translate and just looking up words or wordreference.com that you just would hear a word in a song and then type it in?
Yeah, so usually the words that I would look up were common words that are used in a lot of the songs, which I guess that piqued my interest. I was like, why? What does this mean? Why do they say this in every song?
And what did you find? As you started doing that, what were some of the really common words that show up in K-pop music?
Some of the popular ones are saranghe, which means I love you, and 제발, which means please. So a lot of the K-pop songs I originally listened to were like breakup songs or love songs.
So in addition to learning just the choruses, did you find like right off the bat that popular music in Korean just culturally is very similar to what we hear in popular music and English songs?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really similar in terms of, you know, the music style, but I think they kind of make it more extraordinary by adding, you know, choreography and then, you know, their styles, and the lyrics are much cleaner than what you hear in Western pop.
I'm guessing that is absolutely true and probably also has a lot to do with culture. We'll come back to
Yeah.
that. But Wilson, I saw you nodding a little bit when Lamia was talking about taking notes and writing down words.
Yeah, I've done my share of that.
Yeah, can you just describe that? Because I knew you when you first said, I'm going to start teaching myself Spanish. And I remember you invited me over to your apartment and seeing just a notebook full of words.
Yeah. So I guess what happened when I first decided to start studying again, I used Duolingo for a couple of weeks just to kind of get my interest peaked, and see where I was at. But I found that I was just moving much too slowly doing that, and that's when actually you mentioned to me that I should start reading these novellas that were specifically designed to help Spanish learners, language learners, and that they only used like the same 400 words over and over again, so you'd start to get an idea of this. So I found this guy on Amazon. Actually, his name is Paco Ardit, and I think he's Colombian, or maybe he's from Argentina. Anyway, he has a series of books that go through all these various levels that I started reading. I think I read every one of them. And the cool thing is that on my cell phone, when I read his books, it allows me, if I don't recognize a word, I can just press on it. It'll instantly bring up a dictionary so I can see what it means and continue with reading. But what I did is after each of these stories, I would go back and actually physically write down a vocabulary list. I think that's one of my, learning styles, is that when I write things, it really helps to implant it in my brain. So I brought my list here. Maybe I'll show you guys. This is uncanny, but here's my list. I have about, oh, there it is right there. Maybe 60 words per page. They're all double-sided, and I have about so many of these. And so these are every book I've ever read. I log all the vocab that I don't recognize. And after I graduated from Paco Ardit's books, then I jumped into some children's books. I read like Charlotte's Web, and then I made a big jump from there to The Hobbit, and that was pretty challenging, and it takes me a long time to get through the books. But basically, I should tell you, like, since 20 months ago when I started this, I have been reading every single day, and I only read in Spanish. So I haven't read an English book in like nearly 2 years now. And so my level is really increasing. Some of the words that I found, so one of the realizations that I made was, like, I was reading like Harry Potter at one point, and I started to sense that I was missing something by reading books that were originally written in English and then translated into Spanish. So then I started looking for books that were written by Spanish people to begin with. So right now, I've been slogging through this book for about 3 months now, Cien Años de Soledad, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and it is extraordinary work of literature, but very, very thick, with a very difficult vocabulary. And sometimes he'll have a single sentence that will run on for 3 pages. So it's just wonderful. I love that stuff. Anyway, I'm getting through there, and now I've got some Isabel Allende lined up. coming up next, and you know, the list just goes on and on. So, you know, now I sit down with these words like, you know, my wife will be practicing the upright bass. And so while she practices the bass, I'll just basically pick a random page and then kind of like cover up the Spanish word, and I'll just quiz myself. And I'll go over it like 2 or 3 times if I need it, depending on what level it is. Like a lot of times I know this stuff, but I kind of told myself that, you know, to start this, like obviously I need all the tenses in order to construct, you know, sentences appropriately, but really also I need to have a huge vocabulary. So I just decided, like, what the heck, I'm just going to try and memorize as many words as possible.
Wow. And I definitely would recommend against people starting out with science fiction. I know when I was reading Harry Potter, it took me a really long time to figure out that muggles was not some Spanish word I didn't know.
There's a lot of that.
But one of the things that I hear Wilson say a lot is that routine is really important to him. And I saw you kind of nodding with along with some of the things Wilson was saying. And so could you talk about it in your role? What's the role of routine play for you in your, journey of teaching yourself Korean?
For me, I try to watch as many K-dramas as I can. Um, I think what I've noticed is that I initially started by watching children's shows to because I was just starting off with Korean, so I didn't know any um, large vocab words. But gradually, K-dramas has made it easier as well because it's kind of like conversational Korean. So incorporating that and learning, watching an episode a day because those are like an hour long. um Watching an episode a day, it stays fresh in my mind, and if I don't know what they're saying, then I would write that down as well. So I guess it's just like a fun way to spend an hour a day practicing what you know.
Hmm. And Wilson said that he goes back and quizzes himself on, like, almost does flashcards with his vocabulary. Is that something? Do you do something similar as well?
Yeah, I have Quizlet downloaded on my phone, and I just as I'm watching the drama, I'll add vocab words that I don't know onto my Quizlet deck, and then practice it later on.
Wow. So you kind of not only do flashcards, but kind of gamify it a little bit for yourself?
Yeah.
That's really fascinating. So I'm just hearing like that it's, it sounds kind of so simple to people, but it also, I think what's not to be underestimated is just the motivation that comes in, right? Like Wilson had high school Spanish and had vocabulary tests, right? But all of a sudden, nobody's assigning you tests, Wilson, but you're sitting there studying for them anyways. And can you just talk about the role, either one of you or both of you, about just motivation that plays in, and any similarities or differences you've noticed when it's you deciding, I want to learn this versus doing it for a grade?
Go ahead, Lami, if you want.
So I think uh, for people that learn on their own, it's easier to lose motivation because you don't have like strict guidelines or like you said, tests. So it's easier for people to lose motivation, especially if they see, for example, in Korean, like the writing is completely different, and people just give up when they see that the writing is different. And so I think motivation, if you're a self learner, you have to have a lot of it, and you have to keep um, being persistent and practicing because it's something that you're passionate about. That's why you want to learn it in the first place.
What about you, Wilson?
Uh, you know, I admit that when I was in high school, I didn't. Well, like, I always enjoyed Spanish, and I was born in Tucson, close to the border. Had a lot of Mexican friends growing up, all through middle school and high school. My parents speak, rudimentary Spanish, but they've always upheld a love and a respect for Latino culture. And I think that definitely influenced me. And, strangely, I don't know why I want to say this, but it was one day I had my dad up when I started this thing, this new study of Spanish, and I was like, he was staying with us for a week or something, and every morning we'd get up and I'd be playing like some dumb video game on the computer, and he was getting ready for a trip to Paris, so he was studying French, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm playing this game," and he was like, "Oh, your life is passing before your very eyes." He's like, "You could be using this time to do something. You could be studying French." And I don't know what it was in that moment. I was like, I think it was this inner feeling of guilt that I had for playing these video games because I knew it really is such a waste of time, and I was like, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I don't want to learn French, at least right now, but I was like, I've always wanted to be able to speak Spanish fluently. That's something that I've always just had as a goal, I just never followed through with it. It takes an incredible amount of work. But now in my adult life, I have this new passion for learning. If there's something that I want to learn, like I just go for it. You know what I mean? And it's like, well, 20 months in with this Spanish thing, it ebbs and flows. I have these moments. I never stop completely. I'm always doing something. A lot of times just thinking about my vocabulary words, or I'll come across a new verb. So I'll try to invent sentences using the different tenses. You know, and sometimes I'll express to like my friend Leslie that, oh, I'm so frustrated. I feel like I've plateaued. I'm not learning anything. Like I'm not getting any more out of this. And she's like, calm it, Dave Wilson. Like you're doing this for the love of Latin culture. You're like embrace this as a lifelong thing. You're not. It's like language isn't something that you just learn and it's done. It's it's going on continuously through your entire life. She's like, so don't look at it as this thing like you're getting impatient with it. Like take it on as like every new word that you learn is like something exciting, a new thing to be excited about. And I guess that's like where I kind of want to segue, even though you haven't asked about it yet. But one of the things that I realized early on was I need to be speaking with other Spanish speakers. Like Lamia said, like, watching shows is good. I've used a lot of YouTube to watch these shows, but it's a very, very difficult, especially if there's no subtitles. Um, so finding some friends that speak Spanish has been really super crucial. And it happens in the funniest ways. I was in an art gallery one day. I heard this guy speaking fluent Spanish with another gal. And afterwards, I went up and I approached him. I was like, "Hey, I'm learning Spanish too. That's super cool." He's like, "Oh, that's great," And he told me a little bit about himself. And I was like, "Would you be interested in sitting down over a cup of coffee one day and just maybe help me out a little bit? I'm trying to get my skills up." And he was like, "Yeah, sure. Why not?" So we got together at a coffee shop. It was just like we were like, well, what are we trying to talk about here? It's like, but just very organically, I tried to tell him a little bit about myself or what I do for work. And this guy, my friend Barry, he's like, now we've known each other for about a year and a half of this process, and we still talk on the phone like once a week. Now that it's pandemic, we can't get together, but he is like he's very thoughtful. He corrects me a lot of the time. Now this is something that I find a lot of people don't really want to do. They're like, "Hey, we can have a conversation, but I'm not going to correct you every single time you make a little mistake." Barry, he'll correct me a lot of the time, and I'm like, "Thank you, thank you. Keep correcting me." It's like, this is what I'm doing. Anyway, then I got another friend, my friend Mario. He's half Brazilian, half Colombian. We used to get together over a beer and talk, and it's just like my friend Leslie, and then she's like, "Oh, you should call my other friend," and then I call up this other person, and I find that it's not that hard to come up with things to talk about. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So I haven't really, anyway, I just think it's really super important to speak with other people. can't just do it on my own here. It's like this is about conversation and about expression and stuff. So anyway, I have a lot, I don't know. I have a lot of excitement within me to learn. It just doesn't go away. And I've just decided like I'm gonna study this until I can speak to you as fluently in Spanish as I can in English. And when I feel like I've done that, then maybe I won't, then maybe I'll move to a different language or maybe the upright bass or something.
Or video games.
I mean, honestly, I still like to play video games.
Yeah, and
But
in full disclosure, there was supposed to be another panelist with us who unfortunately was not able to join, but they're learning Swedish, and it's because they play on a Swedish video game server and are, just wanted to know what everybody else in the Discord channel was saying, and so, that they through video gaming have connected with, folks who much like you're meeting people at art galleries and other places, they're meeting them through video games. Well, I mean, I definitely wanted to ask you that. Yeah, and so much of the K-pop, K-drama phenomenon, you're learning about these things, I'm guessing, through social media and you have friends who you've never met face to face and maybe never even seen real pictures of. Um, I saw you nodding with Wilson. How are you finding, others with whom, you can experience the language learning with, who you can practice with, and be less alone on your language learning journey?
So for me, I go to Korean restaurants and I practice with um like daily conversations with the people that work there that are native speakers. And then I've also used in the past I've also used apps like Hello Talk, which you can meet people that are learning, for example, English, but they're native to Korean, so you kind of help each other out, and that's been helpful for me in practicing my Korean.
That's really great. And do you ever do, I'm just curious, and it's so much of what your study is based off of, pop culture phenomenons. Have you connected with others through the music or the music videos or the dramas that you're watching?
Yeah, so usually, I tend to contact people that look friendly or that have, I guess, K-pop um, idols as their profiles or their icons, because I feel like it's easier for me to talk to people that have similar interests. And so if I know that they have um, that icon of a K-pop idol, I'll know that we'll have something to talk about and it won't just be awkward.
Wow, I love that. And something that I take away from both of you that I think is really important for anybody who's teaching themselves is, this idea of there's lots of different ways to you can teach yourself a language, but it definitely requires that you're consistent about it, and that you
Mhm.
have rituals to keep yourself doing it, that you find ways to be rewarded about it, and also that there's risk taking involved, that it's not that eventually you have to kind of come out from behind the dictionary if you want to start doing said structure and getting a conversation, that you have to be brave a little bit and reach out to strangers in order to take that next step. And I want to end just real quick on that reward piece, and maybe just a kind of final question for both of you would be, something where, whether it was early on in your journey or something more recently that comes to mind of where you just had this like, oh, wow, I just understood that. And it just felt really rewarding, whether it was, an early lyric, in your case, Lavia or Wilson, it's something that you understood it from a book and then heard in real life. But what rewards you for your language learning? And Lamia, we can start with you.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think recently my brother and my sister-in-law came over and we actually went to a Korean restaurant because my parents don't like trying new food. So my brother and my sister-in-law are the only ones that will go out and try new food with me. And so going there, I had a full-on conversation with the person that was assisting us, or like our waitress. And I guess it was kind of just like a show off for me, like showing off, I actually learned, and now I'm practicing, because I feel like my family isn't as supportive as it sounds like Wilson's family is. They kind of like make fun of me for it. But showing that off, they were pretty surprised, and they're like, "Oh, so self-learning is actually possible if you're motivated enough."
That's such a great story. What about you, Wilson? What do you find reward in the learning?
Oh, I mean, lots of things. One, I was having a conversation with my friend Mario the other day, and he was like getting excited about something, and man, he started talking faster and faster and faster and faster. And to the point where you can't really get hung up on a single word that you don't understand. If you start thinking like, what was that word that he just said? And then then you're like totally lost. So it's like almost like training to like not get nitpicky about that stuff. Anyway, as he's talking faster and faster, I'm realizing I know I'm getting almost everything he says. And he's speaking to me like, at full speed. And I was like, this is amazing. Like, this is so cool. Like, it's really exciting. I don't know. There's other days I'll play games with my friend Leslie. We'll tell each other a story. So we say, okay, the next sentence for you is, you know, and then you just make up some creative little story. And then, and we do that in English. And then that person has to say your sentence back in Spanish. And then they give you the next sentence, but then you have to repeat the previous sentence in Spanish and then their new sentence in Spanish. And it goes back and forth and back and forth. And, we make up these wonderful stories and crazy, they're nonsensical, but they contain a lot of like really valuable vocabulary. And, just playing those games and being able to have fun with that is cool. And, somebody else was like, why are you doing this, Wilson? Like, what are you getting out of it? And I was like, gosh, it was a personal challenge. I just wanted to get good at this. But one day I was sitting with my friend Mario on a patio pre-pandemic, and we're having a drink, and we're talking all in Spanish. People are passing by. It was a gorgeous day out in Denver, Colorado, and I felt like I was in Spain. I was in Portugal. I was somewhere in Mexico. I was surrounded by other people who, it was like I felt like I was on vacation. It was so wonderful. I was like, here I am at home, but I'm with a new friend who is a native Spanish speaker, wants to help me out. We're having a drink. We're sitting outside. It was like, man, I could have been on a freaking $1 million vacation right there. But it really happened just a few blocks from my house. You know what I mean? It was like so rewarding. I was like, this is just so much fun. And I will say, like, one other time I was sitting having a conversation, and at the end of the conversation, this woman that was sitting at the bar next to the table that I was sitting at, she turns to us at the end of the conversation. She says, I have to admit, I was eavesdropping just a little bit, but she's like, it is just so refreshing and so great to hear people speaking in another language. It's just like so refreshing. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. It's like I'm getting a lot of enjoyment out of this. Other people are pitching in to hear, they're hearing it, they're getting excited. One of my friends I speak on the phone, Deanna, she was like, I talked to her about 4 months after we started speaking on the phone. She was like, hey, Wilson, you really inspired me. She's like, she's a native Spanish speaker, but she's like, you really made me want to work on my language skills. So I actually started taking some private lessons in Portuguese. It's just like, I don't know. The world is big, so many cultures speak so many different languages that, bilingual, trilingual, they speak 4 or 5 languages. This is something that I think all people should do. We should learn to speak in a different language besides our native tongue. It gives us insight into a different culture. It's given me opportunities to meet people, from different cultures, meet strangers who like to do this stuff. Like, I've made new friends with it. I'm excited to travel once the pandemic is over, use some of these skills, just I don't know what it is. I almost prefer talking to people in Spanish than English these days. I'm bored of English.
That is so inspiring and so rewarding. And I think that's just such a good note to end on. Wilson Thomas, Lamia Sheikh, thank you so much for taking time to share your language learning journey with this conference.
Thanks,
Thank you
Noah.
for
Thanks,
having
Lamia.
us.